Greetings and welcome to Connecting with Intent Show. I'm your host Muhammad Wes. On this episode, we have a very special guest. He is the CEO and Chief Patients Officer devoted to driving patients' outcomes and education through advocacy, Matt Toresco. Please join me to give a warm welcome to our guest, Matt Toresco. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Let me start with this. Where were you? What happened? Who were you surrounded with that inspired you to do what you do today?
Oh man, I'd have to go back to 2005. I was on the lacrosse field practicing at the Ohio State University and I broke my neck. And I had goals of going to dental school and ultimately they didn't find that I broke my neck on the field. They didn't find it the 9 hours afterwards of multiple images and CT scans, etc. They let me go. And I went about 4 or 5 months before they found my neck, which had been broken at C7T1 that should have paralyzed me from the thumbs down. I was extremely lucky. But it also unfortunately started a chronic pain journey that for about 21 years, I was on opiates. That's all that they wanted to treat me with. There were no other advancements that insurance would allow. All the while, I was looking for how do I how do I make a difference? What do I do now? It was a big shift from being a collegiate athlete to being a student and then not being able to be a dentist because of my neck and the pain. Where did I want to go? Where did I want to go? What did I want to do? How could I have an impact? So I got into biotech. And I've had a long career in biotech, med device, um, pharmaceuticals, and genomics, all while fighting chronic pain. And it's what ultimately led me to patient advocacy. If it took someone who's worked in healthcare for over 20 years, that amount of time to figure out how to get out of pain and get off of opiates, what is it going to take your general patient, your general human to do the same? And I know how to fight the fight. I know the phone calls to have. And it's not fair. And that's what leads me to do what I do today in engaging patient advocacy groups in industry for pharma, biotech, even some payers who call themselves patient advocates, and analyze the work that they do, give them feedback from their customers and from patients, and try to drive more effective communication and dialogue to drive patient outcomes.
What is your higher purpose in life?
I think my higher purpose is twofold. God has gifted me with this incredible brain that allows me to hang on to a lot of information, whereas my wife calls it, she microdoses Wikipedia whenever she's with me. And to utilize it in two ways. Number one, advocate for patients, be a voice to the voiceless in healthcare, especially in the US, and to advocate for advocacy. Ultimately, it is a multifaceted role here in the States. You have independent advocates that work directly with patients. You have advocates that work in the hospital. Unfortunately, their jobs are being cut due to budget constraints in the system. And then you have advocacy as well in industry. And those folks are also up against it, as not everyone within their company understands what they do. And when you're an expense line, because you can't be tied to commercial outcome of your company, you're usually the first to go. And they have been fighting an uphill battle for nearly 30 years, one that is going through contraction right now. So I see my job as telling the stories that they legally, internally inside their own company can't tell, and advocating for that work.
That's a powerful purpose. What have been top three greatest challenges that you have had to overcome?
Greatest challenges. I think a lot of the folks that I've seen on your show have had some similar ones. I had to first trust myself and trust that I had some self worth. When you grow up an athlete and you get into the pharma world and trying to prove yourself to everyone, you get too locked in getting validation from everyone else and you don't give it to yourself. So for me to go off on my own and do what I felt I needed to do took a lot of thinking, a lot of prayer, a lot of support to say, okay, yeah, you can do this and you should. So it was overcoming that lack of trust in myself, also overcoming imposter syndrome. Who am I at 40 years old to be telling a multinational company what to do? But there's a reason they hire me, and I have to trust that that which I know and that which I do has a lot of value. And I think the greatest challenge is having overcome chronic pain, overcome 22 years of opiates, and my spine, and never stopping, never backing down. I had a lot of people tell me, why why do you keep going? Muhammad, I had 3 knee surgeries before I broke my neck. In fact, my teammates nicknamed me Meathead because I had to be dumb, so they thought, to keep trying to come back no matter how many times I was injured. I think God laughed and gave me daughters for that reason. I have 2 young daughters that are dancers. They couldn't care less for athletics. But it took a lot to get through that and to fix it. But it set me up for where I am now.
What is your greatest failure story? What did you learn and how did you grow from it?
Yeah, we all have them. I love this question. I love it. I use it when I train account managers in the pharmaceutical industry. I tell them all the time to share their failures because it's where everyone learns. Ultimately, my biggest failure story is I was assaulted on a sale. I was, you know, you, I learned you don't have to always prove that you know everything. I got into it with a geneticist when I was selling in the genomics field, and he was not in alignment with what we were doing as a company. And I challenged him, and he challenged me back, and we were going back and forth. And ultimately, you got to learn to use your supporters and not get lost on this one naysayer. Let them do that work for you. If you can build a network, they can help you overcome anything. But the last thing you want to do is go it alone. And I went it alone in that circumstance. And he ended up getting up from the table, walking to leave the room of which I was seated by the door. He was furthest away, and he slapped me on the back and walked out, and the entire room was dead silent. Um, and that silence showed me that I should have used those folks that were silent in the room. They could have been the ones to have whatever fight needed to be had. I didn't have to prove myself to anybody. But that's also obviously one of my greatest challenges is not having to prove myself to someone. So you learn from it, you overcome, find that network, continue to build, and you can overcome anything ultimately.
What is the most impactful book you have read and what did you
Oh,
learn from it?
a most impactful book. There's been two. The most impactful book for me personally is a book called Wild at Heart. It is a Christian book. I will premise it with that. Um, but it taught me there's no one else I need to seek validation from than that which I believe in, and where my belief system lies. That's where my validation comes from, and it's unfair to put that on anybody else. And it allowed me to work through a lot of childhood trauma that is mostly self-created, but it gets in your head, and it's what was making me feel like I wasn't enough. Um, but I would also say, if you haven't read it, Green Lights, which is Matthew McConaughey's book, was fantastic. There's just so many elements in that are impactful for today's society. Doesn't matter what age you are. I highly recommend both of them. If we don't work on ourselves, we're going to fall behind. And I'm a big believer, not so much in self-help books. I think that that's an area that's kind of gotten a little overwhelmed. But in finding something that's right for you, that challenges your thinking, and helps you think a little bit differently, no matter what that is. If you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably not.
What are your goals for the next 12 months?
Next 12 months, continue to scale and increase our marketplace leadership. I wouldn't say it's a crowded market, but when you're dealing with multinational companies, getting awareness from them is difficult as a very small shop. We do syndicated market research and getting that out and getting the voice out and sharing press releases that has been a big impact for us. And for we're a little over a year and a half in. We're doing very, very well. We're on track for our goals this year, but in the next year we would like to double that and really double down our branding and ensure that we are market leaders and that we are speaking about what we believe in. Hence, coming on today.
What advice you will give to younger yourself?
Hmm. Invest in yourself. I think too many people invest in shiny things, and that's something that you can't take with you, and it ultimately doesn't make you better. But invest in yourself, and if you work on you and just let the rest of the world come to you, you're going to be much better off. You're going to be more prepared for when it does come, because it will. It always does. But if you're not prepared for it, you won't be able to grab it. So invest in yourself.
How can we support you?
I would say brand building, and knowledge that there are people in pharma that are working to help other people. It's this big unknown. It's unfortunate that by the latest studies that were done, pharma and biotech, from a reputation perspective, were last behind the United States Congress and Senate in trustworthiness. And it's a bit of their own doing. It's also a bit of historical impact and some bad things that were done in the early 1900s and all the way up through the 1990s. But there are teams and there are large budgets devoted to helping patients, whatever that looks like. And I want folks to know about that. But of course, I want them to know that I'm a credible voice. I'm not slanted in any way, and that comes with the brand building as well.
What would you say about your guest appearance on the show?
I love it. Honestly, one of the things that I train people to do that oftentimes is missing is an agenda. It's a very simple thing, but it has such a big impact for, are people going to be prepared, and are you going to have an effective dialogue? And you gave an agenda. You had an idea of where you wanted the conversation to go. You gave me some sample questions to think about, and preparation is key. Nobody wants to be unprepared. So I really appreciate that about this show.
Thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate you for this.
Of
What
course.
closing thoughts? What closing thoughts would you like to share with our listeners?
I would say two things. Number one, trust that you have something valuable for this world. There's a reason you were created, and you were created different from the next person. So trust that there is something valuable for you to do, and that your story will always help to serve others. As I've heard it best put, all of the stuff that made you the person that you are today is what was made to empower you to help the person you once were. So find out who those people are that were where you were, and give back, because that's going to be your superpower.
Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing
Of
your
course.
wisdom with us today. On the behalf of Connecting with Intent Community and our entire team, we really appreciate you. This is Muhammad West. Until the next episode, all good wishes.